Hi, everybody. Rad Mom here. Welcome, or welcome back to the garden, my happy place to talk about scary things. In today's installment, we have anti-feminism. What are the true roots of anti-feminism? On what basis do certain scholars and ideologues deny the progress of women? Would you believe because it's demonic? Like, yeah, from a conservative Christian perspective, it kind of makes sense. But if you're looking for explanations for the failures of feminism from the material world, I think our guest Rachel Wilson finds some pretty good candidates. No demonic influence required.
My name is Will Spencer. My guest this week is Rachel Wilson, and she's a mother of 5, a patriarchalist.
This was not a term I was familiar with, so I looked it up. Patriarchalism is an archetypal political concept that arose in 17th century England, defending absolute power of the monarchy. That's right, this is pre-Enlightenment stuff. This is beyond conservatism. These are people still trying to argue that God, in the person of the king, should be in charge.
And the author of the excellent book, Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation.
Which unfortunately is not quite as much fun as that title makes it sound.
She went digging into history and found that women have not been as historically oppressed as we've been told.
Not consistently, no.
The authentic history of women has been scrubbed from textbooks by second and third wave feminists seeking to cement their historical narrative of women as cosmic victims. Then, and here's the crucial part, these feminists covered the tracks of their first wave feminist forebears, many of whom were occultists, theosophists, Kabbalists, and mystics, not to mention Marxists and communists. And they were funded by wealthy industrialists, the elites.
Well, that would explain a thing or two.
Who were into many of these same practices. In other words, as hard as this may be to believe, and I'll say it slowly, first wave feminism and Luciferianism are inextricably linked.
Ooh, good stuff, right?
People aren't aware that there's this deeper philosophical and religious and spiritual ideology underpinning all of this stuff.
The true history of feminism is of anti-Christian spiritual warfare.
You may be shocked to find that I don't entirely disagree with these people, but there is a subversive spiritual aspect to feminism, and I think we ought to take it more seriously. But so what is Rachel's motivation here?
Since I understand these things, since I have this information, since I spent years studying how we got here, it's kind of like I have a bit of an obligation to dispel some of the myths and to make life more comfortable for women.
I don't know, that sounds suspiciously like feminism.
For women who are trying to do what I'm trying to do, right?
Ah, there it is.
That's really all I'm trying to do, is not take rights away from women and force them back into the kitchen and chain them to a stove. No, no, no.
No, that would be absurd.
It's more just, I want it to be a valid and venerated choice to dedicate yourself to motherhood.
That does sound nice. And all we have to do is submit to Sky Daddy. Oh, but no, of course, she's not going to lead with that.
It's pretty sensible. It's pretty historically normal. Yet in this day and time, I'm kind of like all alone on one side of the spectrum here with just a handful of other women.
But so far, I'm agreeing with you. I wonder what it is about your message that's alienating other women.
In just 3 to 4 more years, we're going to be in a situation where half of women are not going to have children in the West.
Yeah.
Half. That's never historically happened. And you think that can't be good, right? So why is the whole culture telling me that, I'm a loser for wanting to stay home with my child?
Because our culture is self-destructive.
It's endless cognitive dissonance.
Pretty much. It makes it kind of hard to think straight, doesn't it?
And all you have to do is just be a little bit rational to just knock it down.
I love this. Madam Divine Right of Kings over here is putting herself up as the rational one. You literally base everything on the thought-terminating cliche because God said.
Endlessly. And that's one of the reasons I do a lot of live stream debate, because it's a very good way to highlight how irrational the entire ideology is, how when you try to poke logical holes in it, it completely collapses. It's not that hard to do.
We could literally be talking about Christian theology right now.
It's just that very few people want to stick their neck out and do it.
Hello.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very emotionally charged. And I think some of that your book helped me understand, because whenever I see something these days irrational that's highly emotionally charged, I naturally start thinking there's some sort of spiritual manipulation going on.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a leap. So much for being rational, huh? Why exactly would you believe such a thing?
Right. People don't get worked up over intellectual ideas.
That's debatable. I think the entire Enlightenment might be evidence to the contrary. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was spiritual warfare, too.
And I think you put your finger on something in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, I say, it wasn't me who said it, actually. I quote Susanna Budapest, who is, she was one of the first witches to legally have a witch coven in the United States. She came here from the Czech Republic in the 60s, I believe, left communism there, came here and went to San Francisco, where things were pretty liberal, and she fought for religious freedom because witchcraft was actually illegal here until the 70s.
Hypocrites.
And she had a witch coven that was open in public, and it was challenged, and she went to court and said, we have religious freedom here. You can't tell me I can't be a witch. And she won.
Well, she was right.
And she said that feminism is simply the political arm of a spiritual battle. It's just the political arm of this greater spiritual warfare we're in.
Which is an interesting way of looking at it, because we are sort of arguing for the soul of humanity and possibly our survival.
And that's why I had to explain how these early feminists saw Christianity as the enemy, because they saw it as patriarchal and oppressive, and they saw Lucifer as their liberator, openly.
Because they had caught on to the fact that so-called satanic symbolism was often created by linking evil with the feminine. Whether you believe in any of the magical stuff or not, it's powerful to reclaim these things through reclaiming iconography.
People may not know that these seemingly benign figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady, the typical suffragettes that we all hear about, and they're only ever spoken of in a positive light. I mean, for Pete's sake, President Trump posthumously pardoned Susan B. Anthony for her illegal voting stuff that she was doing.
There's something poetic about that guy pardoning other people for their election shenanigans.
They're just spoken of as these sweet little ladies who were just, trying to help the women. And it's like, no, they were openly declaring Lucifer as their mascot, as their symbol of being a liberator. And people aren't aware that there's this deeper philosophical and religious and spiritual ideology underpinning all of this stuff.
I was, actually. The only thing I learned watching these videos was that apparently Elizabeth Cady Stanton's spirit table is in the Smithsonian. And I guess there is a whole group of kooks out there who think this is a big deal for some reason. It's demons.
Well, let's get into that.
Oh, finally.
Because, when you start pushing back on feminism, you'll get a lot of feminists who say, oh, all the man-hating stuff, that's just all radical feminism. That's since the 1960s. Like before that, it was just about equal rights. That's really what it was about. So that seems to be that period of time, the late 1800s, early 1900s, seems to have branded itself as like, that's the pure feminism.
So those women's level of success is what made them a target for you? Yeah, that checks out.
And that's one of my favorite parts of your book, is like you show that's not exactly what was going on. So let's start there, and maybe we can work our way forwards in time and show how this theme of occultism has wound its way to today.
How it's wound its tentacles through time. Don't you love it?
Yeah. So this is probably the thing I talk about the most, because it's the least well known. And when people find out this information, they're pretty shocked, and a lot of times in some disbelief. And it's like, wait, I have to look into this, because who's this random lady and why should I trust her and why should I believe her? And I knew when this book came out that the claims were going to be highly contested. So I was very methodical in citing all of my sources.
Good scholarship is always appreciated. It's the conclusions that you draw from these facts that betrays your agenda. It's your conclusions that I take issue with, and I wager many others would as well.
Yeah, it was never it was never the grassroots movement that everyone's been told it was.
AstroTurf. The term you're looking for is AstroTurf. She does outright say that women never wanted feminism, never wanted self-determination. That's all propaganda. You're supposed to be at home, God says.
All of the anti-suffrage movement, all of the kind of nasty truth about the early first wave feminist movement has been removed from textbooks. It has been literally removed from the historical record by women's studies departments at universities who gatekeep the information.
I'm not going to say that was a great thing to do, but the anti-suffrage movement has been discredited, for one thing, as well as being a bit embarrassing. It's a lot of internalized misogyny to unpack there. Same for the spiritual stuff. All of mainstream thought for decades has been strictly materialist, no woo allowed. If anything, they were trying to bolster their credibility, not hide spooky secrets.
And their reasoning of why this is okay is something called standpoint theory. Now, standpoint theory is the idea that comes from Marxism. It was developed by just 3 women, primarily Sandra Harding and then 2 other ladies she was working with, who, of course, are all Rockefeller funded.
Bum, bum, bum.
That they developed this Marxist theory that the truth, any idea of objective truth, or that there's an objective historical timeline, is not only problematic, but dangerous, and we either need to do away with the idea of historical truth altogether, or we need to radically redefine it.
I thought this was Foucault. Isn't this critical theory? Whatever you call it, it's a theoretical framework that long ago got too big for its britches.
So standpoint theory says, sure, the history looks a certain way, but that's only because you're not looking at it from the standpoint of the oppressed woman. So they bake all these presumptions into what an oppressed woman is, and then they literally rewrite the history to fit that narrative.
Yeah, that's called theorizing.
So a lot of the stuff that you're seeing now that people think is new, like the gender abolition stuff, the you can transform into anything that you want to transform into stuff, this all comes out of this period in the 1800s when there were dozens, in fact, over 80 experimental utopian socialist communities in the United States alone.
Wait a minute. You said witchcraft was illegal here until the 1970s. So where did all this utopian socialism come from? Oh, Christian mysticism. Speaking of things that got swept under the rug.
And these people were experimenting with gender swapping and switching gender roles and things like vegan diets and the stuff that seems like it's new and recent. Oh no, it was all going on back then in these communities. And what happened is during the Industrial Revolution, we got these extremely wealthy philanthropists, right?
Mhm.
Enter the bad guys. No, seriously. I agree with this one too.
The Gilded Age billionaires of the world who had nouveau riche money that people really hadn't had up until that time, and they saw an opportunity to use universities and then later entities like the United Nations to capture these institutions and use them for social engineering. And feminism was one of the main things they wanted to push.
Feminism was one of the main things they wanted to capture because it could and was causing an awful lot of upheaval in their precious, precious hierarchy.
If you were a wealthy Gilded Age industrialist who had, most of these people went on to be senators or presidents or vice presidents, or were closely entangled with the most powerful people of the time, those people needed lots of cheap labor. You have all these factories expanding. You need a larger pool of cheaper labor. So they thought, well, we could get the women out of the home and into the factories. We can get lots of cheap labor overnight.
As opposed to free. It does almost sound like an upgrade, as sad as that is.
So this was all done through institutional capture of, using the university systems to kind of indoctrinate and rewrite the history and push certain social engineering things like feminism.
To rewrite things like feminism. I think budding feminist philosophies were captured and rewritten along with everything else. What we're dealing with is the hollowed out puppet of what might have been.
And then I also talk about the CIA's involvement in culture creation and pushing feminism as well.
I was aware of this too. I just covered it actually a few weeks ago. I'll link the video down below. It's broadly true of many countercultural groups, sadly.
It's almost unbelievable to look at, except you documented it so thoroughly. And I've read other supporting material around it where it's like, no, this This really happened.
Yeah, it did. I just see it completely differently than you do.
The title of the book is Occult Feminism. Again, I wonder if you can go into a little bit of the occult aspects,
Oh, finally.
because
Yeah.
it's hard not to see black magic at the root of all of this.
Can you define that, please?
The title of the book kind of has a twofold meaning. The first one's the most obvious, that a lot of these women had these beliefs because they had this underlying occultic, esoteric belief structure of some kind. So a lot of the women were theosophists, they were spirit mediums, they were fortune tellers, they were, a lot of them came out of Crowleyan circles. Many of them were into like the Eastern mystery religions or Hermeticism, the Golden Dawn, things like that.
Oh my God. Akashic Records, Corpus Hermeticum. I've actually covered that one too. I will link it down below as well. It's all just different flavors of the same thing. Men interpreting their visions to explain why God says they are in charge.
The other reason I called it occult feminism is because there is actually literally a secret hidden history to feminism.
A pun. Not bad.
That's been tucked away and obscured by these women's studies departments who only want it to be portrayed in a certain light.
Yeah, because I doubt many of those academics actually believe in any of that spiritual shit.
And Susan B. Anthony herself, who wrote The History of Women's Liberation, she says right in the first chapter of the first volume that if it had been up to women, women's liberation would have never happened. The vote would have never passed. And she said the reason for this isn't so much like you might think, oh, they're brainwashed to like their captivity or something. But she said it's not so much that. It's really that they're actually too happy. Their lives are too nice.
Yeah, I feel like we're all familiar at this point with the dystopian trope of creature comforts staving off revolution. Thanks for reminding us we're living it. Bread and circuses.
So Susan B. Anthony said, you can't leave it up to them. They're never going to go for it. We have to get the men, the wealthy industrialist men who have a stake in this, to push it and to fund it.
No, Susan! That is a Faustian bargain if I've ever heard one. And you know what happens when you make a deal with the devil?
And to kind of force it. And she was fine with that because her idea was eventually the women will get with the program. They'll become more progressive. They'll start to see patriarchy as oppressive. And she was right about that, unfortunately. She was right about the fact that over time we can probably use propaganda and just push this to the point that women will begin to have these ideas and agree with us.
Right. It's the ones who think women are people who rely on propaganda, not you and your sky daddy.
It's wonderful if you're a feminist, right? If you've been convinced of this women's oppression narrative, you do look at Christianity and go, God the Father? Well, who says?
I ask this of everybody, so there's no need to take it personally. But I know. He is a jealous God, isn't he?
So you have like Ariana Grande with songs like, God is a woman, or you have all these vengeful, wrathful pop singer girls, talking about female empowerment and women's sexual liberation and sexual power. And it's not a coincidence. It's because underlying that is this idea that women should be the divine ones, that there's this divine goddess, Mother Earth thing.
I will say this for the Earth. There is no debating its existence.
Which is why you always see veganism tied in with the feminism, right? It's like, what? How come all the girls go off to university and they go in normal and they come out blue-haired vegan feminists? Well, this is why.
Veganism is another psyop, sorry.
Because they're convinced of this kind of esoteric Gnostic principle that Mother Earth and nature is Edenic and good.
That's an interesting choice of words because even in your own belief, Eden was our natural God-given existence. But nature is good for nature, not necessarily for us.
And that it's the male demiurge figure, it's the toxic masculinity, it's the inherent violent nature of men that then comes in and exploits the animals and exploits the women.
You literally just described your own self-proclaimed patriarchal system. At least we don't have to argue about that, I guess. Which is currently fucking up the planet. Or do you not believe in that either?
And so what's the answer to this?
But I'm actually going to leave it here for today. Come back Wednesday at 11 for part 2. This was just the first taste of Rachel Wilson's spiritual interpretation of feminism. There's plenty of fun, juicy stuff coming up. Thank you so much for joining me out here in the garden today to investigate a little bit of what anti-feminism actually does look like. Come back at the top of the hour for the live stream where we always keep it lively and we can dig into this a little more. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday. All right, thanks a lot. See you then. Bye.